Hey everybody, welcome back to the TacticalPay Radio podcast. I'm your host, Brett Grayson, and this is a podcast where I get to talk to the pros of the firearms industry. We've got a fantastic show for you today. Joining me today is Caleb Kruckenberg. He's litigation counsel for the NCLA, that's the New Civil Liberties Alliance. They protect constitutional liberties from systemic threats. And I'm talking about the administrative state, the nanny state. So he's fighting the good fight. You got to check them out at nclalegal.org. They're on Twitter. NCLA Legal is their handle if you want to see what they're up to. Before joining NCLA, Caleb represented clients at both the trial and appellate level. He began his career as an assistant DA in the Appeals Bureau of the New York County District Attorney's Office. I wonder if he's ever had to go toe-to-toe with the now infamous Attorney General Letitia James. I'm looking forward to asking him about that. More recently, he's worked as a criminal defense and civil rights attorney in Philadelphia, and he's a big advocate for criminal justice reform. So I can't wait to ask him about that too. Caleb, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, so you have to walk me through this because when I read about your career, it's unusual because you had what seems like a pretty good gig. You had a career set in front of you when you're working for the DA in New York County. You left that path, and now you are a criminal defense and civil rights attorney. So I don't want to make it sound like you went from the evil empire to fighting for the Rebel Alliance, but it seems like to me, from the layman's perspective, you had some sort of Damascus moment and changed the career trajectory. So can you walk us through that?
Yeah, well, I don't disagree with your classification about leaving the empire. Like you said, I started my career as a DA. I was in New York County, which is New York City, and I worked for the Law and Order office. That was what the TV show was about, was that job. And what I saw when I was a DA, I think, is how stacked the system is. The criminal justice system and even the civil justice system is really designed to make sure that the government always wins, no matter what. And they're not supposed to win all the time. And sometimes they should lose. And when you're prosecuting cases, when you're at the DA's office, there are cases that you see that shouldn't be prosecuted, and they shouldn't be prosecuted the way they're prosecuted. And it's very hard in a DA's office, in a prosecutor's office, to do anything about it, to stop it. And, really, I had a moment where I decided that my career is better served on the other side, fighting back. And I'm really fortunate in what I do now because, I sue the government every day. That's what I do all day, is I just get in fights with the government.
And you take cases where you can rest your head at night and not hate yourself. And I would imagine that was a frequent occurrence for people in your position where you're fighting a fight that either A, you shouldn't be fighting, or B, you shouldn't be winning. And I guess that's the Jiminy Cricket at play.
Yeah, well, when you're a prosecutor, when you work for the government, those lawyers always say, my client is the government, or my client's the people. And it's this kind of vague idea. And, I think, frankly, if most people understood what government was really up to, and every case that was brought by the DA's office, I think most people would be upset about it. But, now I represent individuals. I represent people who have real life problems, and a lot of times it's the government has tried to take away their civil liberties, that it's done something that's really unfair to them, and I represent them now and try to make it better. And so you're absolutely right. I mean, I feel great about the work I do. It's tough because, like I said, I represent people, and as I know people will understand, the government does a lot of really unfair things to people, and it's hard to watch, but I get to sort of pick those fights.
Yeah. Well, I think this is something that most conservatives have come to accept, that the government plays favorites, and that's just the inherent nature of a government ran by the people. It's, it's a man-made thing. So of course it's fallible. Have you watched the documentary Making a Murderer?
Yeah, I have.
Okay. Well, that documentary gave me and millions of other Americans a new appreciation for criminal defense lawyers, because the image that comes up in my head of a criminal defense attorney is Bob Shapiro, Johnny Cochran, not the kind of person that you want to represent your profession because, they do dirty work. And sometimes they represent clients that are so obviously guilty, and you think, how can they do that? But the Making a Murder documentary featured people like Kathleen Zellner, and it really put a new face on that profession. And you realize, oh, some people really did get wronged by the government. And there's a book also called I'm From the Government and I'm Here to Kill You by Dave T. Hardy. And have you read that book?
I haven't read that book. I'm familiar with where that line comes from.
I see. Okay. Well, the only reason I bring up this documentary and this fantastic book, which documents all the times the government wronged somebody or some group and legally got away with it, is because I feel like you have a wind at your back. When you tell people you're a criminal defense attorney, they now, I think, are more likely to give you the benefit of the doubt. Is that the case? Or when you tell someone you're a lawyer for people who have accused of a crime, how do people react to it?
I think a lot of people react, well, how could you do that? Don't you represent people sometimes who did things that were bad? And, and the honest answer is, I've had clients that have been accused of all sorts of things, and we're not all perfect people. But it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about the system really is rigged and it's one-sided. And I think anybody who's been in the legal profession for very long, particularly when you're talking about prosecution or government sort of going after people, these are sort of preordained. I mean, the system is set up to make sure that the prosecution wins. They put maximum pressure on people. And it doesn't really matter if you did something wrong or not. The pressure's still the same. That's how you get situations like the Making a Murderer case. I mean, that's a great example of, you have a system that's designed to do one thing, to punish somebody, and it's to punish the person in front of it. It's not really trying to figure out what happened or who's responsible or what. It's, we can take this kid and we can put him in this environment and get him to confess, whether that's right or wrong. And it's a lot of different circumstances. I mean, it's not just criminal cases. I think what people don't necessarily realize is, there's a lot of government enforcement and government lawsuits against individuals that aren't criminal cases. People don't go to jail, but the consequences can be really profound. I mean, it can be, you can be banned from an entire industry. You can have hundreds of millions of dollars in fines. And, these kinds of things happen every single day. And I don't think people even understand that this is part of our government.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that if the media doesn't report on it, it's like a tree falling in the forest and nobody hears it. It's as if it never happened, never made a sound. You take on the government, essentially. I mean, that's speaking broadly and maybe dramatically, but that is what you're doing. So here's the question. Aren't you worried about some sort of retribution? And I don't mean Seth Rich, gunned down in the street, bizarre retribution, but maybe your likelihood of getting audited increased and you don't know and you worry about that, right? Or no, you just don't even think about it.
It's crossed my mind, I'll be honest, but at this point I'm in,
Well, that's true.
at this point I picked a fight with about every government agency you can think of, from the IRS to the FBI and sort of everybody in between. And, I remember earlier in my career, the first time I got a phone call from an FBI agent. It was about a case, but I was like, oh wow, the FBI is calling. And now I'm not going to say that it would really register if I got a call from the FBI. And maybe I should. Maybe that should worry me more than it is.
You're already jaded.
But I think it's probably less of a concern for attorneys. But look, I hear from clients all the time, particularly when we're deciding to actually sue the government. Because when the government sues you or you're prosecuted and you defend it, it's a whole other thing when you go out and pick a fight and you say, I'm gonna file a lawsuit against the IRS. I mean, that takes a special kind of a person. I definitely had this conversation with clients about, what are my risks here? Could the agency come after me? And I'd like to say that that's not a real risk or people shouldn't worry about that, but that's not true. I mean, agencies do retaliate. That's an unfortunate part of it.
Yeah, well, I remember when Bill O'Reilly, back when he was number one on cable news, he said a very candid opening that ever since that he did some sort of expose on some government agency and really made these government agents look bad, inexcusably bad. He said ever since then he's been getting audited, and it was sort of like an unspoken retribution, because he said, in 30 years he'd never been audited. But ever since that controversial story came out, it was like clockwork. He was going to get that phone call in April. And I just thought it's too much to be a coincidence. And then there's no way it's unique to him. And then, of course, when the IRS scandal happened and it turned out that they were flagging any 503c that had the word patriot or conservative or even American in its description or its title, that they were just going to be denied 503c status. And I'm summarizing, of course, I'm truncating the story to a sentence, but that is essentially what happened.
I think it's kind of a symptom of, particularly when we're talking about the federal government, there's so many agencies, there's so many federal officials that have really unique and significant authority. I mean, IRS is a great example, right? They can always go and audit you, but there's a million other agencies. And, you interact with government just about in any way, there's someone that can make your life really unpleasant. A lot of those agencies, a lot of those people, they don't really have anybody to answer to, and they can kind of get away with it. And so that's really a symptom of if you have this really great proliferation of government agencies, government actors.
Are you able to speak about any cases you're working on right now? Because I understand what you do, and I think it's fascinating. But is there any case you can tell us either that just recently got wrapped up or one that you're working on now that can give the listeners an idea of how you spend your days and what exactly you're working on?
Sure. A few cases I have that are kind of towards the end of their cycle are challenges to the ATF's bump stock rule. And, I don't know how much you know about it, but, a few years ago, the ATF issued an administrative regulation where they expanded the definition of a machine gun under the National Firearms Act. And as you probably know, under federal law, machine guns are heavily regulated. And unless you have a machine gun that was built before the 1980s, it is a federal crime to possess one. There's just sort of this finite universe of lawful machine guns. Anyway, so the ATF said that bump stocks, which are the shooting accessory, basically, they're machine guns. And so it reclassified them as machine guns and it made them into contraband. Problem is the ATF doesn't have the power to do that. And at the time the rule went into effect, there were about 500,000 of these devices that had been lawfully sold in the United States. And actually, the ATF told people, legal, they're not prohibited items, you can have them. So you have all these devices just out there, and suddenly the ATF says it's a crime to have them, even if you bought them legally. And if you don't destroy them, we're going to send you to federal prison for up to 10 years. That is a really scary kind of a statement from an agency that just suddenly they can make something into a crime and potentially send people to federal prison for it.
And that's no joke. That is a real threat, the 10 years. It's not, a maximum that would never be issued. It's an actual possibility that someone would get 10 years.
Yeah, it is. And there have been a few criminal prosecutions since this rule got into effect. And it is not a stretch to think that if you were caught, if you had no criminal history whatsoever, never been arrested before, never had a speeding ticket, you got caught with one of these devices now, you would be prosecuted, and I could almost guarantee you would be looking at several years in federal prison, at least.
Wow.
And it's just one of those issues where it's an administrative agency that's doing a job that is not the agency's job. They're taking this decision over from Congress. And, Congress is the one that's supposed to write the law. They're the ones who are supposed to say what's a crime and what's not a crime. It's not an agency's decision. And, as you probably know, that bump stocks are a very politically sensitive topic. There was the shooting in Vegas. And I understand all that. But what happened is ATF got a lot of political pressure, and they made a decision that wasn't theirs to make. So we have a couple of lawsuits about this issue. And they're working their way through the courts of appeals right now. But it's actually a very, I think, important issue, much broader than just this is just kind of a not that big of a deal in some ways because it's it's an isolated kind of an item. But I think the real danger is if the agency gets away with it this time, they can do really anything they want to. I mean, they could make anything into a machine gun or a prohibited item. And that raises a lot of red flags for people.
Yeah, you have to nip this in the bud. You have to push back the moment this policy is introduced, because it sounds so cliche, but it is a slippery slope.
Yeah, yeah.
If the ATF can do that, then it's a government agency. It'll never shrink. That's what Einstein had that joke about. There's nothing so permanent as a temporary government agency.
Right. And one of our tactics here too is I don't want to be in a situation where I'm representing someone as a criminal defense attorney for this issue. So we have made a strategic effort, my organization, the New Civil Liberties Alliance. We're a nonprofit litigation firm, and we went out and we challenged this rule in advance so that no one would get in trouble. I mean, that's the goal here. We don't want anybody to go to prison for something like this. It's not okay what the agency's trying to do. But as I've said, while we've been litigating these cases, I have two cases right now, one in the 10th Circuit, one in the 5th Circuit, and I'm aware of a few people that have been criminally prosecuted. And, it's just a matter of time before others are sent to prison.
Wow. Well, you mentioned you've got cases in the 10th Circuit and the 5th Circuit, and I am by no means a legal expert. I did not go to law school. I'm a history teacher by trade, but I have seen a few episodes of Matlock and some Matthew McConaughey movies. So that makes me an armchair quarterback when it comes to lawyer speak, legalese. And so you mentioned you have cases in different districts. Is this even legal, this concept of forum shopping or court shopping, where you've tried to find a court or a judge that's going to be most likely to give you a favorable judgment? I would think that is an essential part of your duty as a criminal defense or a civil defense attorney, but I don't even know the legality of it. So how does that factor in to your process?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, it's always a question you have to ask when you're thinking about starting a lawsuit. I mean, it's one thing if the government starts the lawsuit, they just pick where they're going to go. But if I'm going to challenge a rule, and like the ATF rule, I have to figure out where I'm going to do that. And typically that goes to where my clients are. And different courts have different views of issues. And if I was going to challenge this bump stock rule, I probably wouldn't go looking for a client in Los Angeles, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Because I probably am going to find a forum that isn't very welcome. But what we've done in those cases is we've gone to our clients, and both of my clients are they're shooting instructors, they're firearms professionals. Both of my clients, they are firearms instructors, they safety classes, and one of them happens to be in Salt Lake City, another one is in Austin. And I think their part of our thinking is that we hopefully want to go to court that understands our clients' lives, understands that, my client in Austin owned a gun store, he's a shooting instructor. And that's a normal way of life for a lot of people in America. And so hopefully I want to go to a judge who understands that. But I think some people put way too much stock into this idea of forum shopping and trying to judge. I mean, you never know. And I think for the most part, judges try really hard to do what they think is right. But
That's really encouraging to hear you say that. It goes against the premise of about every single show I've watched, but
I think that is true. The problem is the system for decades is really set up to be unfair. And so I think you have a lot of judges that they want to do the right thing, but the rules are such that the outcome is it's only one way. And and so I think part of what or an organization like mine, part of our thinking and what our strategy is we want to kind of chip away at the edges, try to help make the system be a little bit more fair and take away some of those, some of the rigged parts of it. And I mean that's the goal, right? 10 years from now I want a system that's a little bit more fair, that's not quite as biased for the government. And if I get that, I'll be thrilled.
sure. It's interesting. We now live in this world where if you're not completely supportive of the federal government, then it's like you're a fly in the ointment. You know what I mean? It used to be like the punk rock thing used to be to don't trust anybody over 30 and give the little guy the benefit of the doubt. But I feel like we're in this strange phase in American history now where if it's Dr. Fauci, if it's President Biden, if they say it and you just reject it for whatever reason, then you're a jerk. And so in that respect, you have your work cut out for you because I feel like there's a tendency now that didn't used to be there to side with the big guy. It's like rooting for the Yankees, which I do. But people say like, oh, how can you root for the Yankees? You know, they're the favorite. And so you've got that wave, that current to swim against.
You're right, and I'm going to probably get a little technical here, but it's worth talking about. There's a legal doctrine and called Chevron Deference, and it's something that my organization fights it. It was one of the main reasons we started, and it's basically a legal doctrine that courts are supposed to give the government deference. They're supposed to give them extra consideration, and if there's a tie between the government and someone else, they're supposed to go with the, and that is the legal doctrine, and it is
That's tie
infected.
goes to the first baseman, and that not the runner, the first baseman.
Exactly, and I mean that is the way the law has evolved over the years. And if the government comes after you, they get the benefit of the doubt, but it should be the other way around. And it comes up in so many different cases. It came up in the bump stock case, and it's outrageous. It's outrageous that we have laws and court decisions that say that criminal prosecutors get to tell judges what to do, and judges have to listen to them, and judges who are supposed to be reading the law for themselves have to listen to what the government says and have to defer to their interpretation. But that is a
Sure.
part of the law, and it's completely unacceptable.
Yeah, it is. And there may be a chance that the Chevron deference gets overturned by the Supreme Court. But yeah, the way it's phrased here is on this website, because I'm looking at it, it says that courts, you can't substitute your own interpretation of a statute for a reasonable interpretation made by an administrative agency. So basically, what it's saying is, like you just said, if a court sees a statute and this is how they interpret it, but the ATF says, here's how we interpret it, then the judge is supposed to side with the ATF's interpretation and not the trained judge. So
Right.
that's crazy.
It's the cult of expertise. That's one way I think I can think about it.
Ah,
And
yes.
it's kind of what you were saying, right? It's we're the experts. We know better than you, so you should just listen to us. We know better. And it's written into the law where judges are told, "Hey, we're the experts. We know more than you do about this, so you have to listen." And it's not even a suggestion. I mean, in the law, it's mandatory. The judges have to follow it. And
Yeah.
and we should be able to question that. We should be able to question expertise and say, wait a minute, is that real expertise, or is this just you saying it because you're in power?
It's interesting. This might be an issue that liberals and conservatives can actually agree upon, because I can see Elena Kagan and Sonia Sotomayor and all the conservative justices saying, "Hey, the judge, we should defer to the judge." I mean, because that's what a judge would say. So there's hope in the sense that the Supreme Court may say Chevron deference is about as reasonable as Plessy versus Ferguson or Dred Scott.
Well, that's definitely in my 10-year plan. Let's let's put it that way.
Hey, my man. That's great. Yeah, there's so many cases that I just pull out the popcorn, and sit down like the Michael Jackson gif. And the couple that come to mind of the government taking on a celebrity because they just want to scalp. And I think that's what you were getting at earlier, is what's most important is they get that scalp on the wall. And the two that come to mind are when Martha Stewart was being tried for insider trading, which nobody can really define. And then all of a sudden she's in the same courtroom that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was in, just earlier, a couple years earlier. And you think, this is bananas. They're going to send Martha Stewart to prison. They sure did. And then, when I was living in Dallas, Mark Cuban, I don't know if you're familiar with
Yeah.
this, but the SEC sued him or took him to court, or charged him. They did something. Because of insider trading again, which again is this nebulous charge that means anything you want it to mean. And it was over like a couple $100,000. Mark Cuban's worth billions, as if Mark Cuban would risk prison time for a couple $100,000 over some silly website that never got off the ground. And I just, you just have to say, oh my gosh, this is good drama, because it's so clearly not a witch hunt. There's a better term for it, but I just don't know it. But a scalp hunt, where some overzealous prosecutor thinks this is going to be a career maker. And God, you must have hung out with so many people like that. They were just frothing at the mouth, looking for a big name to take down.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, in the criminal law, and you talk about insider trading, I mean, that's a great example. Everything is illegal. Everything is a crime. If someone has done something innocent or whatever, you can find some criminal statute out there that you can try to force it into and make it into a crime. And, Mark Cuban's case is a great example, because he was a rare person that fought back. The SEC came after him, like you said, over something that was, he didn't do anything wrong, but it was, they got it in their head that he had committed insider trading over a pretty small amount of money. And he went to war with them. He spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to defend himself, probably millions of dollars in legal fees to defend himself. And he won in the end.
Yeah.
And for him, it was just about making a point. But normal people can't do that. Normal
No.
people don't have $1 billion to fight back. And the truth is, like, if a FBI agent or a prosecutor or something sees like a news report, they get their attention on you for some reason and they decide they're going to come after you, they'll make it happen. It doesn't matter if you actually did anything wrong or not.
Wow. Well, do people come to the NCLA, or does the NCLA go find cases? How does that work?
So it's a little bit of both. Sometimes there are issues that we see coming, and we go out and we find people who are affected by it, and we kind of pick it that way. But a lot of times people just call me. People call me, they email me, and they say, I have a problem. And some of the most important work I've done, some of the best cases we've had, have come that way, because the government is huge and it does so much stuff. I'm educated in it. I try to pay close attention. I have no idea half the time what they're doing. And I am surprised constantly when people call me and tell me stories about things that have happened to them. So, I think that's an important part of my job, is just listening to people, talking to them about their experiences, and then seeing if there's some way we can help.
Wow. You're doing the Lord's work. I mean, I say that to a lot of guests, but you're one of the only guests I think I've talked to that is doing the defense side, or I should say from the lawyer's perspective, because I'm usually talking to people who are hiring the lawyer. They're the ones on the wrong end of the suit. So this is really exciting for me. But unfortunately, I've already taken up half an hour of your night. And so that takes us to the rapid fire question segment. So I'm going to ask you a few questions and you just say whatever comes to mind.
Okay.
In your opinion, what is the most important constitutional amendment?
Probably the Fifth and 14th Amendment. I'm going to say the due process.
When I interviewed Dave Hardy, he said it was the 14th Amendment as well. How about that? That's pretty cool. I mean, I think his interest is in what defines a citizen. But yeah, due process and Fifth Amendment. And unfortunately, Dave Chappelle ruined the Fifth Amendment for me. If you've seen that skit.
Yeah. Hey, as a criminal defense lawyer, I am all about that.
Yeah. From your perspective, he popularized it.
Yeah.
Okay, from a history teacher's perspective, he ruined it. New York Attorney General Letitia James, I don't claim to know a lot about her. I only know about her because I saw that she was doing everything she could to get banks to disassociate with firearms-related companies. And I just thought that was such an ugly thing to see the government go after private businesses and pressure them to break ties with it was just gross. But my question is, Letitia James, is she... I'll just say yay or nay to Letitia James, the Attorney General.
Definitely nay. And it is repulsive that an elected official would be trying to use the courts and criminal prosecutions and civil pressure to try to punish people for exercising their constitutional right.
Well put. I'm in Houston, and I wonder sometimes, am I really getting the full scope on the story? Because the way I'm reading it, she's bad news bears. Because you never know. You just never know. Okay, the next question. Which TV show or movie most accurately depicts civil and criminal defense attorneys?
Well, I hate to say it, but My Cousin Vinny is
Yes, I love it.
it is one of the most accurate courtroom depictions anywhere. And having been kind of the carpetbagger lawyer in a lot of different places, I was not quite like that, but I definitely had that experience where you go to court and you know where you stand immediately, and it's not favorable.
That's so beautiful you said that. I love that movie. I just watched it a couple months ago. My wife and I, she said she'd never seen it. I said, okay, well, that's what we're doing. So glad you said that. I can't wait to tell her. Joe Pesci is so great. And Marissa Tomei, I think she even got nominated for an Oscar. Man, it was such a fun movie. Okay. This one is kind of out of left field. But again, I've been cyber stalking you, so therefore it's appropriate. If there was a Mount Rushmore for figurative painters, who's on it?
That's a good one. So what? I get 4, right?
It's your mountain.
Well, I got to put Rembrandt on there. Leonardo. I got to think of somebody contemporary here. You're right. This is really left field.
Bob Ross.
I'm going to say no to Bob Ross.
Okay, fair enough.
Lucian Freud, and you may have to look that one up, but
I will.
But
that's only 3.
Oh, well, Raphael also. So like a little bit of Ninja Turtles here because we have Leonardo and Raphael.
Sure. Okay, 2 questions left. Are you loyal to the Kansas Jayhawks or the Temple University Owls?
Well, so KU is my alma mater, so I have to be a Jayhawk. And I actually saw one of the rare instances where they played each other. When I was in law school, the Owls played the Jayhawks, and it was kind of a bloodbath, but it was really fun to watch.
Oh yeah, I was waiting for you to. Well, good for them. Okay, and the final question. Well, actually, 2 questions. All right, yay or nay to term limits for Congress?
Yay, for sure.
All right, fair enough. I mean, I could go either way on it. I feel like the founding fathers must have talked about that at the Constitutional Convention, and so I defer to them. But I don't think they foresaw people like Nancy Pelosi and Strom Thurmond and people that just never die or never retire, I should say.
Yeah,
fair enough. Okay, and this really is the last question, but it depends on whether or not you're a firearms owner. The question is, in the event of a zombie apocalypse, do you have a go-to weapon or go-to plan for self-defense?
You're probably not going to like this answer, but I am probably one of those people in the zombie apocalypse that does not make it past the montage where in the beginning of the movie the zombies appear, then there's like a little cut scene, and then it's months later. I'm one of those people who just disappears. I'm probably not the one you want in the apocalypse.
Yeah. Well, that's how those movies start. You have to figure out real quick as a viewer which of these characters is in it for the long haul and which ones are going to get sniped. And somebody's got to get sniped, so by the zombies. Okay, fair enough. Well, this has been a really informative conversation, Caleb. Thank you so much for coming on the show. And if viewers want to check out what you're up to, just go to nclalegal.org or go to Twitter. Is there any website or social media profile that I'm leaving out here?
No, there's information about all of our cases, some of the ones I mentioned, but we have a ton of different cases that we're involved in. It's all on the website. There's a lot of really great information, and you can just learn about what we do. You can even sign up for a newsletter, and you'll get our cases as they progress.
Fantastic. Well, Caleb, I hope we get to talk again soon. I'd love to pick your brain on a bunch of other issues, and hopefully we can do that sometime soon. Thanks for coming on, and I'll talk to you later.
Thank you very much.
If you enjoyed this show and want to hear more, visit TacticalPay.com/podcast to subscribe on your podcast listening platform of choice. And don't forget, TacticalPay is the leader in firearm-friendly credit card processing. If your company is in need of a merchant services provider who shares your values, visit TacticalPay.com to learn more.